So recently, I spent the past week being pissed at Universal for one major reason that puts them on the same level as Disney. And that, my friend, was the news of the announcement of the main cast for the How to Train Your Dragon live action remake. Where at this point, we can all expect every freaking major Hollywood studio to be so damn unoriginal to remake all their classics, and I couldn't be more upset. Although you actually might not hear it in my voice considering I'm scripting it out, but that is what I really actually feel when animation gets disrespected on the daily and transform into live action remakes, because this comes at a time where most people are rooting for DreamWorks producing solely animated feature films, which was great, while Disney has been producing mediocre lackluster remake at the same time. They have made good films in the past year, and that's something better than Disney's variety of mediocre crap I've been upset at, but now apparently DreamWorks' parent company Universal feels justified in diving into this because of the box office successes that Disney actually had with it in its most beloved films, factoring nostalgia as a powerful drug in society. It makes me sad to think that even the original director, Dean DeBlois, is actually directing it, but this is considering they've already did stories before and wanted to do something original in this form, and still pretty much upsets me now that I get to see him and his co-director from the first, Chris Sanders, actually star in live action remakes of their films, remembering that both of them actually directed Lilo and Stitch, my favorite animated film ever, where Chris actually voiced Stitch, and now he's going to do it again in a remake of his own original film, and now Dean is directing his original film's remake, releasing 2 years on from now from a film they both did. Now I know it's not their fault in any way, and I still respect them for what they have done and provided with these two various films, but these film studios just don't know how to create good original quality live action content anymore. So much so to the point that this is becoming the second remake of a 3D animated film in live action, because like I have said many times before, there have been nothing but remakes of 2D, and how most studios these days just disrespected that style because they feel it is obsolete to make in the industry nowadays, and that breaks my heart seeing things like Disney going in to have big projects like Wish being 3D with their sketch lines and not going back to traditional animation. Nothing about this really screams outstanding when I've watched things like Spider-Verse blowing that style way out of the water, and this video is going to be similar to my concerns about Moana, and like that, how this film style just doesn't look good when they plan to remake it, how now they're starting to disrespect 3D animation as well for one that takes a more realistic approach to its animation, because when you see films like How to Train Your Dragon or most of the DreamWorks films as well, you have this certain style that is already portrayed in a fashion that could actually exist in real life, but taking that to a level of impossibility we actually know of. The expressiveness that is allowed in this form, which DreamWorks stories are actually known for being a parody of such fairy tale ideals and using Vikings and dragons in this particular one. And what Universal is doing here is just banking off of this trend of nostalgia by not paying any attention to what the series already did so well that didn't even need to continue. The franchise already concluded well with Hidden World, and now you're just going to remake this film 6 years after that. Like, that is still a fresh movie where, above all, I never expected them in any way to be remaking this with that timeline sooner than Disney is doing with Moana. Granted, this is adapting the original film, which is actually 13 years old at this point, and Moana actually comes only 7 years after, which, to be fair, hasn't had a date announced yet, but that is still a smaller time gap than what Disney has done to their live action films. They are virtually saying the sooner they release a movie, the better, so they can re-release it a year after. I mean, at this point, they might as well remake Wish next year as well to stay ahead of the curve in the case of Disney, because there's no limit to how much films you can actually do with this fucking genre. Of course, before I dive more into the animation department, we have to talk about the casting decision. Something similar to the Little Mermaid situation that is going to upset people once they announce the actual first trailer. Now, the main cast includes Mason Thames as Hiccup and Nico Parker as Astrid, the actress who actually played Sarah in the Last of Us series, which of course causes more concerns with how she is considering the very story. And like Disney in this case, it just feels like they're just using diversity as a shield considering the original story had blonde Vikings. After all, the original film took place in the village of Berk, which of course predominantly included white Vikings taking place in Scandinavia. I mean, I don't know a whole lot about them or the region, but I do know what they already did in that film specifically regarding Vikings and the region they actually take place in. And of course, Nico is not white in this very case, similar to the Little Mermaid situation, but much worse regarding regional specifics. It is a case where you can't shield yourself from the fictionality of mermaids and going into the reality of Vikings. Now, these portrayals of Vikings, however, can be regarded as fictional to reality beyond the dragon aspect, but still doing that causes a lot more concerns, more so than what Disney did to race swap a fictional character like Ariel to create another cultural argument to encourage people to see the film. film. In more ways than one here, Universal seems to be sucking off of Disney's toes for some reason in regards to remaking a film, checking all the required boxes to take away from the already pre-established art and what Hollywood is just becoming nowadays. Like, I would have thought the understanding by this company and Comcast as a whole was to move away from companies like Disney to do their own, like they have did in their own parks, delivering better experiences in some ways, and now of course riding off the success that most people online are perceiving the studio as doing so nowadays. It just doesn't make sense for them to do so, to follow this hard line of Disney when considering they also own Illumination as well as an animated studio. Like, are they going to actually remake their crappy films now? Like, at this point we can expect their own crappy films to get remakes too, because I know how shallow of a corporation Universal has become at this very point. I mean, I've already had these opinions about them for so long, but this time it's actually going lower than Disney at this point. It's just that they never seem to understand that these are the types of films we don't want. We have already seen these films and we do not need them to be remade again 10 years later in a realistic setting. I mean, remakes have been existing for a long time, especially including just live action films being remade differently as another live action film, but this is a special case where it doesn't make sense to do so considering what animation specifically did for those very stories. It consists of a template that is mediocre and doesn't understand the types of stories we have already had for the past few years and in their original films. The style of the film is that certain way because the movie wants to express it as that. I mean, CGI animation in live action are still not quite as good enough to convince people it works well with the human actors, because not every film likes to put passion in their work like Avatar did, because it takes a lot more time in doing so, where these films are not done for the sake of art, and that just always banks off the original in the most mediocre fashion instead. There's just no justifiable reason for its existence when the original already blended those worlds well enough from before. Like I said in my Moana video, it is already portrayed real enough to convince you they are interacting with the mythical creatures. How this style is trying to do so in that way so it can be perceived as realistic at the time and believable to an extent. I mean, yes, you can still make the case that this is DreamWorks and they are not Disney in any way, but when you look at the details surrounding a film like this, it still is hard to justify it not being the same mediocre slop because it is remaking that. Because no matter what, a remake in this day and age still refuses to acknowledge what worked in animation. Not one studio in America these days seems to be willing to reintroduce 2D or embracing animation anymore because it doesn't fit them as a company in the 21st century, and I really hate that. And that is partially the reason I made this channel in the first place, to rail against the continued decisions of disrespect that keeps being made to animation and into live action, and how they can make good stories but they just usually don't, and it's just stupid to make a film and casting choices that are only made to check the important boxes of diversity that is used to stir up reactions to drive attention to the film when the eventual trailers drop, rather than creating an original piece and media that can actually understand that as well. So despite having the original director of the film, the art of this film isn't really valid when it isn't even passionate enough about its own story, because it's already been there and done that. I have made it clear that I wouldn't care about the castings of most of these films and situations because that is the reality of the world we inhabit today and how it's just going to be like this, but this is just disingenuous, resulting in a film that isn't even half of what the original was like. I mean, unlike some people, I won't continue to be complaining constantly or taking articles out of context about what some actors say, because that is stupid and doesn't contribute to any meaningful discussion about the movie or art itself. You just make it harder for a film to be enjoyed because people will always be petty about that until the end of time, and that's another thing going against these remakes, because they say something negative rather than just fully positive about the situation. And finally, the problem I have with this is that it results in the beginning of something depending on its success, because at this point Disney has gone way too far to stop actually remaking all of their films, and that most likely won't end. And if this film actually does successful enough, they will come after Shrek, they will come after Madagascar, they will come after Kung Fu Panda and so forth, and will not stop. Because once you start going, you keep going until you die out. So what I want you to take away from this situation is the fact that it is resulting in the destruction of the art, considering the many awful remakes that have been made, how only a few have really worked and have been good movies while the rest are just cheap, doing the same exact thing that has already been done. So with those actual points said, I cannot and will not support this. I mean, I will see it commentated on for YouTube when it comes out, but that is as far as I'm willing to support this or any decision that these companies make, because they don't care about the animation and the art what it brings to the value of movies. Because when you already have so many content surrounding the universe that has already been made, the remake is the last thing you would ever think about because it's already been a been there done that type of situation where at least sequels are original in storytelling fashion and even a TV series based on it. With that said, the future looks bleak and I cannot wait for everything to end in disaster, and I'm tired, so goodbye.